This is how I make my gooey pumpkin pie cinnamon rolls. These are an absolute fall staple, and I love that the recipe uses an entire can of pumpkin. We start by combining our dry ingredients, which includes 4 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour, 2 packets of instant dry yeast, and 1 teaspoon of fine salt. Then we work on the wet ingredients, which includes a 1/2 cup of pumpkin puree, 1 cup of whole milk, a 1/2 cup of unsalted butter, and a 1/2 cup of sugar. Heat that up in the microwave for about a minute until the butter is mostly melted, but you don't want it to be too hot because otherwise it can kill the yeast. After giving that a quick mix, we pour it into our dry ingredients and then mix on a medium-low speed until the dough is combined. Now it's going to be pretty sticky at first, but we're going to keep mixing for an additional couple minutes once it comes together, and the dough should start to look a little bit more elastic and smooth. And once it reaches this stage, we're going to start adding in additional flour, 1 tablespoon at a time, until the dough is tacky but not sticky. So when you poke it with your finger, it shouldn't leave any residue. And that's when you know it's all ready to go. So at this point in time, we just cover it with plastic wrap and set it aside to rest for about 10 to 20 minutes to help the gluten relax, and while that rests, we work on the cinnamon roll filling. This includes 1 cup of pumpkin puree, 1 cup of unsalted butter, and then brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, allspice, and salt. And don't worry if it looks a little bit separated, this is just from the moisture in the pumpkin, but it's going to bake up just fine. Then we set that aside and roll out our dough. You want this to be about 24 inches by 18 inches, but what really matters is that it's 24 inches across so that each strip that you cut will be about 2 inches wide. And once it reaches those dimensions, we're spreading half of the filling over the dough, pretty much covering the entire thing, and then we're lining a 9 by 13 inch pan with parchment paper and spreading the other half of the filling on the bottom of this. And I know this seems a little bit crazy, but it's going to give the pumpkin pie cinnamon rolls the best gooey bottoms. And then once our pan is prepared, we're cutting 2-inch strips and we're just rolling these up individually. And I have never done this technique before, but it truly works so well. It gives the cinnamon rolls so much height and helps them bake up to be so much fluffier. And you can totally make these the morning of, but you can also make them the night before. At this stage, you just want to chill them, and in the morning, you're going to set them aside to proof a bit in a warm place for a couple of hours before baking them. Whichever way you go, you're going to bake these in a preheated 350-degree oven for about 26 to 30 minutes, or until the tops are nice and golden brown. And while those bake, we make the pumpkin cream cheese icing, which is just 1/4 cup of unsalted butter mixed with 1/2 cup of cream cheese. To that, we add 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, 1/4 teaspoon salt, 1.5 cups of powdered sugar, and then the remaining pumpkin puree that's in your can, which should be about 1/3 cup. And I like to spoon the icing on when the cinnamon rolls have rested for about 10 to 20 minutes, just because you want them to still be warm, but you don't want it to be completely liquefied when the icing goes on. These really do just have such a soft, wonderful texture to them, and they are so quintessentially fall. The recipe for these is also linked in my bio, or you can Google Chelsey White's gooey pumpkin pie cinnamon rolls and it'll be the first thing to pop up. These are my gooey pumpkin pie cinnamon rolls, and they absolutely live up to their name. They bake up pillowy soft with gooey centers, they're packed with warm spices, and the best part is that this recipe uses an entire can of pumpkin, and all that pumpkin naturally colors both the dough and the icing. And while there are plenty of methods to roll and cut cinnamon rolls, this is my first time ever cutting strips and then rolling them individually, and I have to say I'm a huge fan. And this is where the recipe gets a little weird, but just stay with me. We make double the filling and use half of it to coat the bottom of the pan, and this is what's going to give the bottoms this wonderful gooey texture. And while the rolls bake, we use the last bit of pumpkin to make the pumpkin cream cheese icing. And after swirling generous spoonfuls over the warm cinnamon rolls, it's finally time to cut in. These really do taste just like fall, and they're the type of cinnamon rolls where you'll find yourself eating the entire center in one bite. This is a day in the life of a baker making 6 dozen cookies for her local free bakery. I woke up bright and early to get this done in time, and it was truly the perfect day for baking. So the concept of the Free Little Bakery is based off of the Free Little Libraries that kind of sprung up during the pandemic, but instead of putting one book there or taking it at a time, one person signs up and fills the entire bakery, and then anyone in the neighborhood can swing by and grab a treat. I had such a hard time deciding what I was going to bake, but I decided to make my oatmeal scotchies because the recipe is absolutely delicious and super scalable. Now, making the dough actually went pretty fast because I just made 2 triple batches, but it took a while to get them all baked and cool. And then it was time to think about packaging them. So I've never used a heat sealer before, but I wanted to individually wrap each cookie and I wanted them to stay fresh. And of course, this ended up taking longer than I thought, but luckily my mom was over helping with baby sweets and she helped me get these packed while he took a nap. And then it was finally time to deliver the cookies, and I started to get a little bit nervous. It was a lot of cookies, and I was like, are people even gonna come and get these? But silly me, there was literally already a line when I got there, and that's when I realized that people are pretty self-motivated to get a sweet little treat on a Friday. Everyone was so sweet, and the cookies were gone before I knew it. It was truly a 10 out of 10 experience, and I'll definitely be doing it again. I've teamed up with my friends over at Domino Sugar to make this delicious butterscotch crunch cake. And let me tell you, it is just as amazing as it sounds. Its tender brown sugar cake layers are filled with crunchy toffee bits and toasted pecans, and then all of it's frosted with the fluffiest butterscotch Swiss meringue buttercream. And then of course, all of it is drowned with generous drizzles of salted butterscotch. The star of the show clearly is Domino light and dark brown sugar, and I'm super excited that Domino is coming out with new zipper packaging for their brown sugar. It allows added freshness, it locks in moisture, and it makes it way easier to scoop directly from from the bag. Brown sugar is used in every single component of this cake, and that's what gives it such an amazing depth of flavor. It's the type of cake where you'll find yourself daydreaming about it after you've had a slice, and I can speak from personal experience. The recipe is linked in my bio. This is part 2 of making my niece a bluey and a bingo cake. Now, I absolutely loved how these turned out, but I wanted to have some other desserts there just to make it feel more kind of like a complete dessert table. But in this house, we like to work smarter, not harder. So I made a little bit of extra cake batter to make mini cupcakes and some cake pops. So I essentially made 3 different desserts with 1 cake batter, which I love. Also, there is something so incredibly satisfying about dipping cake pops. Make sure that you freeze them though before you dip them, just so they keep their shape and don't fall off the sticks. Then I used my favorite parchment paper hack to get the sprinkles back in the container, and then it was the moment we've all been waiting for.
Favorite?
And her smile and that little giggle make it all worth the effort. She immediately declared that the bingo cake was hers and that we could share the bluey cake, and you know what? I'm okay with that. And I absolutely love how she ignored the slice that we cut for her and just went straight in with the spoon. A good time was had by all, and now I just need to think about how I'm going to top this next year. My niece is currently obsessed with bingo and making of them, but check back for part 2 to see my niece's reaction. Today we're officially testing out my new oven after learning that it bakes 60 degrees cool. This is a gas oven, and while I've had electric and gas ovens in the past, this one really threw me for a loop. Whenever you are testing out a new oven, you want to use a recipe that is tried and true. And for me, that is my no-chill chocolate chip cookie recipe. I did add in some leftover toffee bits just because they're delicious, and I decided to make 6 different batches just to really test this out in a lot of different ways. The first batch I wanted to bake on convection because the temperature does stay a lot more stable that way. I also tested it on different racks. And let me tell you, this first batch definitely gave me some false confidence. They looked actually pretty good. They spread a little bit more than I wanted to and browned a tiny bit more, but they looked similar to how I wanted them to be. The second batch was kind of silly, but I baked it at standard 350, which I knew was cool, and then I added on some additional minutes to the bake time. And then for the third batch, I accounted for the temperature difference and tried to adjust the bake time, but it did not work. I found the biggest salt crystal ever, but it didn't help with the appearance of those cookies. So at this point, I figured the next few batches I'll test with convection, and it's hard because convection does bake more evenly, but in this oven, it really over browns things and kind of undercooks the centers. But after taste testing the cookies, that was definitely the way I wanted to go. Also, I know, my job is so hard. And despite baking the remaining batches on convection, they turned out way different than that first batch, which is super frustrating. I'm not ready to throw in the towel quite yet, but if you guys have any recommendations for 36-inch gas stoves, I am all ears. While I'm absolutely in love with our new kitchen, something about the kitchen lights just was not working for me. I think it's just a style thing, but they had to go. I wanted something that was just really simple and clean that wouldn't take away from the kitchen, but would still provide some good overhead light. The first step was obviously just to get them down, and then I got these really simple globe lights, which I naively thought would be super simple to install, but of course we did not have wire cutters, and yes, the instructions clearly stated you needed them, but a day later, once those arrived, we were able to finally cut them down to the height that we wanted them, and then I was set to work installing. But of course, things are never that easy. After we got one in, somehow the screw got stripped on the other side, so we had to make another trip to Home Depot, but you know, you live and you learn. I still don't understand how this ended up taking 3 days, but I'm really happy with how it turned out. I've always been a fan of red velvet cake, but throw some Oreos in there and I am sold. And I'm not quite sure why the two go so well together. I don't know if it's like the hint of cocoa in the red velvet cake layers and the chocolate in the Oreos, but truly is a match made in heaven. And then when you factor in the Oreo cream cheese frosting that this cake is covered in, it's just so many good things in one delicious cake. This is the type of cake where the flavor really speaks for itself, so I kept the decorations pretty simple on this one and truly just savored every bite.